Welcome back to Members Welcome podcast, brought to you by To Be Agency, where we share new innovations, learnings, and implementations in our practice as community managers and strategists. To learn more about building your online community, visit www.tobeagency.co. Last episode, we discussed Alta Ski Resort and its skier community. Our main takeaway was that Alta's success is deeply rooted in its focus on serving its core members of ski enthusiasts. This emphasis is on community over commercial appeal has helped Alta to not only survive but thrive by fostering a loyal community, following a community that spans generations. This emphasis on community over commercial appeal has helped Alta to not only survive but thrive by fostering a loyal following that spans generations. Today, we're going to discuss the Porsche community and the brand and everything Porsche related, and maybe discover why Porsche is every man's dream car for our female listeners out there. Besides Andrew today, we have a first-time guest on this pod. Jeremy is a devoted sim racer and Andrew's brother. They have a shared love for motorsports and the machinery. So I'm super excited today to talk to them and learn everything about Porsche. Hi, how are you guys today?
Hey,
Doing good.
Yeah.
Jeremy, also, we all actually work together too. So I guess we're all like family and
coworkers?
coworkers and a little bit of everything. So yeah, this is a good episode. How many podcasts have you actually done with Toby before, Jeremy?
I think we just did one, or I only joined one of them like a while back. Yeah.
Back in the day. Yeah. Cool. Nice. Well, good. Good to have you on this one.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And then, we're going to talk more about these communities and feel like Jeremy is into the current zeitgeist of things. So we'll probably have him back quite often.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I'll start with this question, right? I think that's a very interesting start. So what is on your list that is your dream Porsche spec and why?
So you use the word spec, so you've obviously been hearing
I've been brainwashed, yes.
about cars and customizing them. I guess it changes every time they come out with something new. And I think it changed like 4 times last year because they came out, call them like 4 like Halo cars, if you would. And this is sort of the last generation of internal combustion engines or ICE vehicles. And so Porsche over the last probably year or 2 years has kind of done a swan song to like the great naturally aspirated engines out there. Because of all the emissions regulations and all of the things that are going on in Europe and have been going on in Europe over the last decade, they basically can't make like gas only cars anymore. They have to make hybrid cars at the minimum now to meet a lot of the regulations. And so this year, it's basically one of the last years they decided to like newly develop these cars. And so my dream car right now is called the Spider RS. It's basically like a Porsche Boxster on steroids with like their best possible engine in it. And the reason it's my dream car is because I've always thought sports cars should be roadsters. They were originally built as roadsters. The original sports cars and racing cars didn't have a top on them. They didn't have a roof. They still don't, right? At least in F1 and the open wheel series. The Spider RS is to me like the perfect summary of like what a real sports car is. Naturally aspirated, it's a convertible, it's a 2-seater, and it's just built to handle really well. So that's my dream car. You can't buy it even if you had the money to buy it, and we'll talk about why being part of the Porsche community is an interesting one. But if I had an opportunity to, that would probably be my dream car, at least today.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, I know we'll talk more about it, but is the fact that you can't even buy it, does it make you want it even more?
No, I just think the product is so good that even if it was available in mass quantities, I would still want to buy it. Yeah.
Got it. What about you, Jeremy?
For me, it's one they just kind of announced it last year at this like Rensport reunion event that they hold. I think it's like every 7 years or something like that. But yeah, this one, I don't know. I think Porsche just does one of the best jobs of having like a very classic design and just sticking to their design language. And I think this GT3R 911 GT3R Rennsport, it kind of combines a lot of the old design language they were using with a lot of the new tech, a lot of the new just the new everything, So I think in terms of appearance, that's definitely my favorite right now. And I think there's only like 77 units that they made or that they're making this year.
It's a race car.
Did you men-
Yeah.
Did you mention the car model?
Yeah, it's a 911 GT3R Rennsport. Yeah, it's
It's
kind of a
a
Okay.
mouthful.
it's a special version of the 911. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Got
literally
it.
like a race car. Yeah. They're
Got
not
it.
actually gonna race it in any events, but yeah, they kind of made it just like Andrew said, as kind of a swan song type deal.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like both of you guys' dream car has kind of a nod to Porsche's history and the things they have done before. And I feel like because they have stayed true to who they are, but they keep on introducing new stuff to you guys. Um, that's maybe why that you guys are loving this brand, right? So I want to ask, so what makes the Porsche brand particularly interesting to you guys when we're discussing brand loyalty and community?
Not every car like enthusiast is a Porsche enthusiast. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of car enthusiasts that don't care at all for Porsche, for that matter. Actually, MKBHD, Marquez Brownlee, he's like one of the most famous YouTubers in the world. Has built is one of the original guys, built the channel, tech reviews, this and that. He's a gearhead, right? And you'll find that a lot of Porsche fans are just they love tinkering with stuff. They're like technology, they're gearheads. And I remember Jeremy, he bought his first Porsche.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you saw that video, right? He bought a matte black,
Yeah.
911 Turbo S, right?
Yeah.
Great taste, great spec, right? It's with his brand. He's all about matte black and all that kind of stuff. But it was funny when I was watching the video as he was the video about him when he bought it or took delivery. He was talking about how, like, yeah, when I was younger, like I didn't really Porsche was cool, but like it wasn't like really exciting for me as a younger kid. And as I was growing up, and like I think he actually said the word matured. I don't remember if he said that or not, but as he was like getting older, he had like a really big appreciation and started to really understand why Porsche has like such a cult following. And I kind of like I think about the people that I've met in the Porsche community, and there's a few characteristics of them that I think that like set them apart from like other enthusiast car owners versus like a BMW person or a Mercedes AMG or Audi or any of the other, or Ferrari or Lamborghini for that matter, right? I think the first thing is that like people who like Porsche, they like really nice things, right? They're super extra. They like luxury. They like the brand appeal, the cachet of the brand, but they're super practical people, right? And like a lot of them you'll find like they want to buy their like 911 because they want it to be a daily driver. And a lot of like when you look at Ferrari and Lamborghini and like some of the other like more exotic car brands, they don't want to use those cars as like daily drivers,
Right.
and so the other aspect that I see from it too is that the Porsche community, they like if I were to describe them, like they like understated but reliable things, right? And one thing that we'll talk about as we get into this is like Porsche's real history and culture and heritage comes from motorsport. And the reason why they became so famous in motorsport is because they were like legendary for being reliable and running their cars really hard over really long distances and times, like for things like the 24-hour of Le Mans and things like that. Um, as opposed to like other car brands where they want to be like a little bit more avant-garde, like a little bit more edgy, right? But they're more unreliable cars, right? So it's kind of like,
Right.
The hot girlfriend who might leave you like, in a second for that other guy, right?
I
And so
hate that you compare cars to women, but
sorry,
point
we're
taken.
talking about cars and you're with two car guys. So, and then like Jeremy mentioned, I think last but not least is like, they definitely value like classic design, right? And being able to stay true to the heritage of the brand and the design language behind the brand. And you actually feel a lot of the analog part of the brand in both design and experience, right? And we'll talk about that more. But it's crazy because like they are probably one of the most technologically advanced companies out there when it comes to engineering in motorsport, engineering and production. The way that they do their exclusive manufacturer program is basically you're able to build like a custom car, but they can take the car off the line, customize it, and put it back onto the line, which is insane when you think about like what modern manufacturing is, right? I say that they're like a really old school brand, but they're still on the cutting edge when it comes to engineering, product, and for sure, we'll talk about this marketing, content, community, like all those things. So I think that those like three aspects of the community are like why it's different. And I think the reason why people are loyal to it is because they found their audience, right? They found people who are practical. They've been successful in their lives, but they want nice things, right? And they like this balance between performance and luxury, right? They like the cachet of the brand and what it represents. And so I think ultimately, like the Porsche does a really good job of extending like the lifestyle of the car, right, into something that we all share in common, right? Things like road trips, right? Date nights, right? But also things that are really unique to like the automotive community, things like track days, right? Car reveals and car shows, right? And like car meets, like Sunday car meets, right? So they extend like that brand into all those parts of people's lifestyles. And I think from even like being early exposed to the brand as a teenager or even a young kid to like dreaming about buying one, I think they play this really long game of trying to build relationships with prospective customers, and then once they get that customer, they basically have a customer for life. So it's
Yeah, and I think
yeah.
there's also like I think Porsche is one of the only like I guess they create a supercar, but most like their competitors like Aston Martin, McLaren, Ferrari, Lamborghini, they don't have like an accessible car. You know what I mean? Like for Porsche, they have the Boxster, they have models that are a little bit more accessible to most people. Um,
Are
but
you
their
talking?
competitors
Right.
yeah, but their
Are you?
competitors, most of the cars are like, over a couple 100,000 just to get, the base model pretty much. So I think Porsche has that thing going for them where it's like, they realize not everyone can afford a supercar right off the bat, so they're kind of they have a car that you can get an entry into the brand, and I think that helps them kind of just build off of that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And like what you guys said, Andrew mentioned that the more mature car lovers might tend to like Porsche, and then what Jeremy said about racing, um, it made me wonder, um, have you guys always loved Porsche, or is something that you grew into as you got older? Because I think important to talk about this, so we can find out why Porsche has managed to cultivate such a dedicated fan base from certain group or not, certain age group or not.
Yeah, that's a good question because I remember when we were younger, or when Andrew and I were younger, we used to look at the Boxer and we used to think of it as kind of like a chick car.
Yeah.
Um, but I know that dynamic obviously has changed because Andrew,
Yeah.
he obviously just owned a Boxer. So
Yeah.
yeah, it'd be interesting to hear kind of what changed for him.
I never really, growing up, I always, thought it was a cool brand, and they had, everyone knows about the 911, but I never, there's sub models of the 911, and generations of it, and it went from air cooled to water cooled. And so like there's this, like I didn't know about all that stuff. I just knew it was a sports car brand with round headlights in the front, and it's like a midlife
Very
crisis
iconic.
car. Yeah, and it's like a midlife crisis car, right? Like, in the 80s and 90s, it was like, oh yeah, you just made your money in the stockbroker market. Your wife just left you or whatever. Go buy a Porsche, right? Like, and they literally had. You should see some of the ads like from Porsche back. They would not fly today. They're so like today's
inappropriate.
Yeah, definitely inappropriate. Like things about measuring sizes of things and stuff like that, right? Like literally in the like headline of the ad copy. And I kind of wish we still advertise like that, to be honest with you, because it shows like how much the world has changed, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's funny that you asked this question, because I think I started wanting to buy a Porsche because I played an Xbox game, and I was playing. I think it was. I think it wasn't even like the Forza Motorsport, Jeremy. It was like the open Forza Horizon. It was the open world, like type of game where you get a car, you drive around, you do like street races and things like that. And so I remember I got the 718, Cayman GTS or whatever. And I was like, oh yeah, this car actually is like really fun to drive around. And it's like, it was kind of like, in Gran Turismo, you wanted to get the Skyline, right? It was the easiest car to like build fast and make it easy to like rip around the track, because it was all wheel drive, and you could like mod it to 1,000 horsepower or whatever. And I remember driving this one, and I never like, when you progress through the game, you like buy like crazier and crazier cars until you end up with like a McLaren Senna or whatever at the end, right? And I just kept this car through the whole like game. And that was like just before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, and then Lisa and I were just like bored. It was like, this is, I've always wanted to drive a mid-engine car, and I always wanted to drive a Cayman. I was thinking of it after playing the Xbox game, and then so I rented a Cayman on Turo. It was a lava red 718 Cayman S. It was a 4-cylinder, so it wasn't a naturally aspirated. But I remember just driving the thing around Angeles Crest Highway, and I was like, man, now I know what, I get it, right? I get why people like love the feeling of this car. And so that just kind of dovetailed into like falling down the YouTube hole of Porsche content, which fortunately or unfortunately, there's like no shortage of, and really good stuff. Right. And so most of the creators that are out there, like I watched a lot of their reviews and, things about it, and I just got hooked. And then you fall into that part of it, and then you fall into the options you can put on it, the different specs, the different models and things like that. And, that was kind of my introduction to the brand. And then I eventually ended up buying, a Boxster GTS. And then after I moved to Utah, it just didn't make sense to keep it around anymore, so I sold it. But, I met a lot of friends, right? Like through buying that car. I, had a lot of really great sort of new experiences that I wouldn't have experienced if I didn't have that car, right? And you might wonder, like, you could do anything with any kind of car, like what's different about it, right? But driving around at 6 a.m. when the sun is coming up in a canyon, with, just ripping through a canyon with, the sound of the engine in your ears. There's no other way to describe that feeling. And so there's this like really visceral experience I think people get from these cars, which makes them fanatical. And then the next step is like, let me find other people who are doing stuff like this. Right. And that's the natural evolution.
Yeah. So you kind of, I guess what I got out of it was that you was influenced by a game. So it has not really much to do with the life stage. Do you think if you play that game when you're in the 20s, will you still have the same kind of reaction?
Because I didn't have money to buy that kind of car in my 20s. It was like when I was in my 30s, I could play it, and actually I could afford it then. And I was like, oh, it's actually not just a dream, it's possible,
Yeah. So that kind of like makes sense to what Jeremy said, right? Like most of these McLaren or whatever, they have the top of the line race car. And to most people, they're not really that attainable nor practical, right? But with Porsche, they have all that, but they also have this more practical version that's actually a good product. You know, like some brands, they make practical version, but
It's
they're
still a
crap.
Porsche.
And
It's still a
it's still a
Porsche.
Porsche with the engine.
Yeah.
And then because of that, like, you know, people in general, once they reach that life stage of 30s, early 30s, late 20s, when that becomes attainable, then that's something they look look into almost immediately, sounds like, right? What
Yeah.
about you,
Totally.
Jeremy? Have you always, I feel like since I know you, you're more of a supercar fan, right? So how do you feel
Yeah, I
about
think
Porsche now that you're older?
yeah, it's actually it was interesting to actually hear Andrew's side of it because for me it was similar. You know, I haven't been a Porsche fan my whole life. I think at the start of the pandemic, Andrew actually showed me the series that Porsche put out called Road to Le Mans with Michael
Mhm.
Fassbender, right? And he's trying to become, or he literally competes in the 24 hours of Le Mans. And I don't know, I just connected with that because at the start of the pandemic, I also started sim racing, you know? So I don't know, I really just connected with how they were showing, like, you know, the visceral nature of racing and just the behind the scenes look, like the emotion, everything, you know? And, you know, getting into sim racing, I just really identified with a lot of that and the course of improvement or all of the improvement that has to happen as you're getting into something new, you know? Yeah, and as I started sim racing, one thing was like I started driving the 911 in the sim and it just has a completely different feel to other cars, you know? It's a rear engine, so most of the weight's on the back. You have a lot more traction when you're coming out of corners. And I think that in itself is something that makes the car really unique. And it's like, it's a driver's car for a lot of people because it gives a very different feel than other cars out there.
Yeah. So two
Very
things
interesting.
actually on that. So Jeremy, there's this clip of Elon on Joe Rogan's podcast, and Joe
I
Rogan is
saw this. You
talking.
said it's never
Yeah, yeah,
supposed to
yeah,
work out, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So for the audience out there, Joe Rogan is like a huge like car guy. He's got like this like epic GT3 RS 4.0, which is like one of the rarest and probably the best example of what Porsche is. And so he's telling Elon, like, yeah, the Porsches are amazing. They have this character to them. And Elon just goes, dude, like, it's not supposed to work. Like it's not supposed to go fast the way that it just doesn't work. And then
Engine
what
work,
Joe was
yeah.
trying to explain to Elon was that, look, like it can go faster because if you know how to drive the car and you know the character, and normally you wouldn't be able to do this in a normal car, but in this car, yes, it's a little like wiry around the edges as you go in, but if you really know how to use that rear weight bias, it makes the car faster and it gives it a whole nother character to it. So there's a character to the car in the actual way it drives that defies literal physics, right? And then number two, and I think actually this is the most important point in what Jeremy mentioned about that Fassbender Road to Le Mans series. It was about a guy who did not know how to do professional racing to get into professional racing. And I think right around then was when Porsche realized that, wow, our audience is no longer just like 60-year-old doctors who are like in a midlife crisis and want to buy a 911. Holy shit, there's like young people out there who've got money that can buy our Boxsters all the way up to our $250,000 like Halo cars. And guess what? These guys are going to make media out of it. They're going to promote it. And so I think, and guess what? What does Porsche also do in esports? Right? They have their whole Carrera Cup. They have all these things in esports. So a guy like Jeremy, who just got into esports, saw a piece of media from Porsche that he's not really. I mean, he likes the brand, but he's not like a loyalist to the brand. And then he saw that it's like, oh wow, like I'm looking at the journey of a person getting started in a field like this. I connect with it, right? And then if Jeremy starts seeing like Porsche branding in esports and sim racing thing, it just again, maybe does Jeremy end up buying a Porsche like 10 years from now? Right? Like that is the
Probably, I
seeding.
think so.
Right. That's the seeding of this and how it happens. I came in through a video game. Jeremy came in through a piece of media, and then it got extended through a video game. So I think that there's some really that they're playing some like 4D chess. I think when it comes to like weaving this web together, but there's obviously I think they're deliberate about it, but also like I think it happens very organically as well too, right? So,
And I think a lot of it has to do with just the way that they reinforce their brand. Like
yeah.
when you think about Porsche, you know it's about engineering, you know, like they have that classic style. And because it's at the
Reliability, right? Yeah.
yeah, and because it's at the brand level, you know that it carries out through the entire brand and all of their products too, you know? So I think
Even
that's
down
why.
to the Macan, right? The Macan,
Yeah, yeah.
great SUV. Like most reviewers, if they're sports car fanatics, like they won't talk shit about the Macan. It's because it's
Yeah.
a great car, right? And same thing with the Cayenne. It's like a big, glunky, you would think SUV, but they figured out a way to make a Q7, Audi Q7, like a Porsche. And I have a Q7. It drives very differently than a Cayenne. A Cayenne drives more like a Porsche. So it extends into their product, right? You can't just talk about it. You got to do it, you know?
Yeah, that's very cool. It sounds like just listening to you guys talk about it, you guys get so excited because like I think you guys know a lot about everything, and I feel like that is the like a shared common characteristics of all the enthusiasts in this community. They know everything about everything, and they love to talk about it. When Andrew first got his car, I just saw him just constantly on Reddit threads, on Instagram, looking at other dudes' cars and vice versa. And he basically said that's what everybody does in the community. They talk about cars, they post about their cars, and then post about the other people's cars, right? So that's to me is a very vibrant community. So Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about how that kind of community or that way of communicating with the fans got started and where they
Yeah.
are, how they are now?
So I think like most communities, they usually start out organically, right? And it's because people are passionate about something. And so Porsche was a brand that got started, I think, in the 40s, maybe in the late 30s. It kind of has a controversial history because of its connection to the Nazi Party. And there's actually a really good podcast episode out there from the podcast Acquired. It's a really, a lot of you know that podcast. They did like a 3 or 4 hour episode on Porsche. They brought Doug DeMuro, Jeremy, on, and he just like the guy is like a history book when it comes to, but they've got a somewhat controversial history, right? And a lot of their engineering and design was used for the Nazi Party to create a lot of the things that that Germany used in World War II. But regardless, Ferdinand Porsche, Dr. Ferdinand Porsche, the founder of the company, guy's an engineering guy, obviously. He basically was like, look, there's no cars out there that do what I wanted them to do, so I'm going to make my own. And so the first Porsche that came out was the 356, and I think it came out in like the early 40s. And people, got onto it. And the initial communities that were started were actually owner communities, right? Like, how do I fix my car? Like, there's no one to fix these things. It's too expensive, whatever. And I think that harkens back to the ethos of a lot of like the early Porsche owners, which is they like to tinker with their cars. Like, I don't see a Ferrari guy like messing with his 458, or, Enzo, but I could certainly see a Porsche guy like trying to work on like a 66, like air cooled 964 or something like that. Right. And so they all got together basically like to get help, to find parts and to source parts. And, as, obviously Porsche had a huge, and the only reason they got some awareness about the 356 is because they already had a reputation in motorsport, right? Especially on the international stage in Europe with Le Mans and whatnot. And for those who don't know, like the 24 hours of Le Mans is sort of, it's seen as an endurance race, essentially, right? And it's not only the endurance of the team, but can your car hold up 24 hours to like taking that kind of beating? And I think Porsche really started to develop a reputation for actually being kind of like a reliable sports car, right, through all of those. And so, you start to see this happen. And as, after World War II ends, right, international commerce and trade starts to open up in the United States and North America. You have this kind of revival of economy, and middle class starts forming, wealth starts getting created, all these sorts of things. And so Porsche now starts to open up distribution into North America, right? Now you've got a dealer and supplier community, right? That has now started to form to sell the cars through into the US. And basically, like, you don't have an interested community in North America unless you have a dealer network, right? And so that is a very important piece of it, I think, is that having the commerce infrastructure, especially back then, we take for granted today because the world is so global. But like having a retail and distribution network in the United States, I think was a huge part to obviously getting some traction for the brand here. It's a boring, but I think important piece. And then as that starts to happen in North America, you start to have membership clubs and organizations, whether they're related to the Porsche brand, most of them were not. But they're like just people who like organizing rallies and car meets, and, people just wanted to find ways to connect with each other over shared interests, even back then. And eventually things like the Porsche Club of America, with individual and local chapters, got started, and the dealers support those clubs and provide sponsorship to them and stuff. And so I think, that dealer network, selling the cars into the US, getting some traction, and then owners themselves coming up with their own kind of membership clubs or communities, and then Porsche kind of formalizing it into like the Porsche Club of America was sort of, I think, at least I can't speak more to like, and clearly in China, like there's a huge community growing there. The color for the Macan EV release was purple, and like that's a color in China. I think that, well, at least it represents like
Royalty.
royalty, yeah, like wealth and royalty, right? And so,
Yeah.
like, you can tell that they're starting to steer their brand to try and build communities now in Asia, which have not traditionally been a market for Porsche, right? And so, the last sort of community that I sort of seen that was formed that I think is very important is the journalist and media community, and more recently these days, the creator community on YouTube. And I think that in itself is just such a really critical part of the Porsche ecosystem, because especially these days, like, you're trying to get a really expensive thing sold, like, people are going to watch a lot of media about those things, right? And learn about them. And they're going to want to hear it from people that they trust. And so I think the journalist and media community to Porsche, they've always found a way to make sure that they take care of that community, because they know that they're the evangelists to new people and existing people for the brand. So there's a lot of communities, I think, Lacey, is the point. And they all got formed either from like more of a commerce or business standpoint, or from more of an organic standpoint where like just people wanted to get together and like show off their cars and talk about their cars in a parking lot,
Right. So you're saying that, like, because these communities started to form, grassroots, and the Porsche saw that there is something there. So the brand itself kind of formalized those clubs or communities and made it part of the marketing or part of the outreach for the brand itself. Is that right?
I think so. I think it kind of came eventually naturally evolved into that. That's actually, as a community
That's
builder,
brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder how many brands right now today are actually paying attention to that, because there's so many Reddit subreddit threads of talking about like everything possible, right? But I don't see brands like formally talking about them or formally like say, yeah, those are our people kind of thing. Is there any lesson to be learned from that?
It's tricky. I think if you look at, we're a German company, and for those have worked with like, don't understand like German business culture. It's like, it's very rigid. It's very like hierarchy, process driven,
Yeah.
right? And I actually don't know how to answer that in the context of Porsche, Lisa, because I don't know how they do it. They do some really entrepreneurial, like innovative things that I think would be impossible to do at a super corporate company like the way they are, right? Or at least from the outside. There's something in their culture and their org structure that allows this hey, we have to stick to the fundamentals, but we're willing to like go out on a limb. And I don't know how to answer that actually, because I don't know how easy it is for a large brand to do something like that, because they have to keep their brand tight, right? But if you're a
Right.
smaller
Yeah.
brand, or you can definitely do stuff like this, right? Take Reddit posts and things like that and share them with your own maybe private community, or ask your community themselves in Reddit, like, hey, what do y'all think of this, right? And so I think there's a lot to be learned from that, but I just think it's hard for large brands to be able to do what they do. And I think they've just done a masterful job at being able to do that with such a large organization, because you know the approval bureaucracy death that things have to go through, right? So
Yeah, but perhaps like maybe the brand and the company seems bigger than the team actually is, like, right?
yeah.
I wonder how many people actually works at the corporate office doing all this.
It's probably
Um,
less than you know what, you're probably
yeah,
right. And you know what, remember they did do an NFT project, right?
yeah,
That is
yeah.
pretty, like I saw McLaren did one. I think who else did one, Jeremy? Bentley did
Alfa
an
Romeo.
Alpha did
Alpha,
one, but none of
Yeah.
those brands are as big as Porsche, right? And as, and again, I was very impressed to see that they had dipped their toe into Web3 and tried to do it the quote unquote Web3 way. And they still have a project out there, right?
yeah.
I don't even know is the floor still there? Did it hold?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm
I
sure
actually, I
it's
have to go look
funky.
it
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, like we talked about, a lot of Porsche's history and then how active and into the community is, right? So from you guys' experience, just being involved in the community and, consuming their content and advertising and playing games and whatnot, like what strategies do you think Porsche use? I guess not strategies, but like out of all those things that they do, what kind of is you guys' favorite or had the most impact on you?
Yeah, Jeremy, why don't you go first?
I don't know. I think so. The media portion for sure. I think they do the best job of any of the other manufacturers in terms of putting out content that's, engaging, it's interesting. It, they put out a lot of different types of content too, It's not all just geared towards motorsports heads or gearheads. You see ads, clearly directed towards women, and so, yeah, the media part, I think, is a big piece of what kind of draws me to them. But then also, the more I get into sim racing, it's just like the feel, I guess that the more I drive the Porsche online, the more I want to drive one in real life. I think it just reinforces
Yeah.
yeah, it's just something that's interesting, or it's different from everything else. And I guess a lot of times I'm kind of drawn to what's different. So yeah, I think it's just partially, the way that they built their cars, and then also just the way that they promote them.
It's different, but like the right different. It's unique in the right way.
Yeah,
Like the old Porsches, the engine hanging off the back, those killed people. Like James Dean died in a Porsche, right? Like went off a
yeah,
cliff in Malibu, right?
yeah. They were
And
called like Widowmakers.
they were called Widowmakers for a reason, right? And
Oof.
but they kept, it's so crazy. They still kept it. And then, just as technology evolves and things and change, they figured out a way to make it an asset, not a liability, right? And when you watch like these Cup series and things like that, they can hold their own against, all the Ferraris and Aston Martins and things. I don't think it was a strategy they used. I think it is a result of the media strategy as a result of the brand strategy. But I think I got more connected into the community or into Porsche as a brand when I met the other people who were owners. And I always, for
Mm.
some reason, I thought like, hey, when I bought this thing, and I'd go up, it used to be like old guys like sitting around in like camp chairs, like drinking coffee, like. But I went up and it's like YouTubers, like, gimbals and like filming stuff and like drones everywhere. And we met Dom and Rick, right? Like they're all about our age and, have done pretty good for themselves in their lives considering like their age, and they were able to acquire these cars. And I ended up meeting like people in tech from NorCal who had the same car that I did, same color, right? And we're just like nerding out because we literally bought like basically the same spec, right? And I just ended up meeting, these folks, and I ended up meeting like fraternity brothers from like back in the day who I found out became Porsche nuts like over the years. And it was just like the diversity of the community. And then, and to Jeremy's point, like you end up meeting women who are like super into Porsche as a brand as well. And there's a whole like sub community of women who are, and go figure, they're all entrepreneurs, right? They're all badass women who like run businesses. One's a race car driver, like, like you just meet these like really interesting people who have built these really interesting life. Not everyone's a lawyer. There's a lot of lawyers and doctors and bankers who, I don't, that's not the community that I typically hang out with, to be honest with you. The sub community are all these like entrepreneurs who are younger, maybe skew a little bit younger, who are owners, and they like media, and like we like sharing stuff with each other in WhatsApp groups and things like that. And to me, that was the reason why I think I just like got in deeper, was because I was like, oh, there's actually other people like me, not just old guys who are bankers and lawyers and doctors. Like, there are people who like built the lifestyle that allowed them to buy this thing and achieve this thing. And like, we're all living our best lives right now, basically, and so like we connect on that, and we talk about cars, and we talk about business, we talk about, things like that. So it was actually finding friends, you know what I mean? And you meet friends through the things that you love, essentially. And it was an easy way to do that, especially living in Southern California when we did, because it's like the Porsche Mecca of the world, right? So
that's very interesting, though, because it sounds like your love for the brand is not just like the product, how awesome it is, the branding, the media is like one part of it, one huge part of it, but the other huge part is actually the community you've met. Like the fact that you guys are talking about it, nerding out on it, kind of almost reinforces everyone's love for the brand because you're constantly talking about it, right? It's like the brain reinforcement.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
It's almost like their brand strategy, their media strategy, it all pushes forward this engine, which is their community, and their community essentially is their engine,
powers itself.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's right.
That's like the end game for that's a dream for brands and communities, right? So Andrew mentioned something about we've met a lot of Porsche owners who are younger, right? Yeah. And you mentioned in the beginning that Porsche kind of took notice that their demo is not switching to younger, but the younger is adding on to the current demo, right? So what are some of the, I guess, marketing or media strategies that they are doing to gear towards more the younger crowd?
Yeah. So when did Maria Sharapova play tennis? It was like probably like early 2000s to like maybe early 2010. And
right.
Porsche was,
I know, that's like, crazy.
She was a huge sponsor of Maria Sharapova, as Nike, big brands were. And I remember like in that time period, Porsche did a lot of like, sponsor a golf tournament, like sponsor you were the title sponsor for this golf tournament, or the title, and they still are title sponsor for this women's tennis tournament in Germany. I think it's in, not Halle, but it's a tennis tournament, right? A pretty big one. And so they did a lot of those kind of sponsorships and things like that, the traditional kind of stuff. But what I started noticing in the last maybe 5 years, and maybe even sooner, they started doing collaborations with like Blackpink, right? Building a Taycan spec, electric Porsche spec. I forgot for which of the Blackpink girls, but one of them.
Jenny,
that's right. And they, had her colors on it. They did a photo shoot. They did some media around it. I'm like, oh my God, like every girl that sees that Taycan is like, I want a Taycan now, right? They don't give a shit about Le Mans. They don't care about they don't even know, know what a Line 11 is, right? But oh my God, even my daughter probably were like, oh my God, I don't think she
want
saw
that pink car.
But I want that car, you know what I mean? And, like that is an example, I think, of, does a 60-year-old doctor care about Blackpink, getting a custom spec Taycan? I don't think so, but certainly maybe the 15-year-old, 20-year-old girl does. And they're like, wow, that's a pretty damn cool car. I want one of those. And then now it becomes aspirational, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they keep putting that
And it
content
got
out
on the
there.
radar, and it got on their mind, got on the radar,
Awareness.
you know?
It's
Yeah.
awareness, right?
Yeah.
You would never think, why would I want to put $150,000 electric car in front of a 20 or 18-year-old or 15-year-old girl? But it's the same damn reason why you put a Lamborghini Countach poster, right, on your bedroom wall, because that 14-year-old kid, 12-year-old kid is not going to buy it, but someday, you know, they're going to want to buy the Diablo or Huracan or whatever Lamborghini has at the time. And so I don't think that tactic has changed. The medium and the format in which we deliver it now has completely changed. And so I see, and another example I'll give you, this is the last one, is I was shocked, and I was just like, this is so innovative when Porsche released, and I only found out about this because I was looking around their like B2B press releases, because that's what I do in my free time. And they mentioned that they were building an AR app for their media partners. So I was like, what? Why would they build an app for media? Right. And then I was reading the press release and I realized, like, oh my God, this is brilliant, because all the press, they want to review live versions of the car. They want to sit in it. They want to show you the interior. They want to show the exterior. But Porsche has to get a car to you to review it, a physical car from a dealer or whatever. With all these creators that are popping up everywhere and creating all this content, if they have access to an AR app where like I can film like on a green screen, me walking around a 911 and like basically creating content, they just enabled their media partners to create more custom content using their app. Brilliant B2B play, right? And so that's just another example of how they're playing 4D chess, I think. I don't know if that's the reason why, but as a marketer and a media person, that's why the reason why I would use it, right? So I think there's a couple of B2B and quote unquote B2C reasons why.
Yeah, I like we haven't even talked about their user generated content yet,
Yeah.
right? Like Porsche's, the stuff that they put out is like it's super well produced. There's like a story to tell, emotional. Like I think I watched something and I got teary because they're talking about I forgot which one was like the son, like my dad had this car, and then I bought the same exact car from like he found it in the country somewhere, like sitting in the garage for like, you know,
it was a garage bar and find. And I was like, oh my God, that was my dad's car. And then it was just like, and you know what? There's hundreds, maybe thousands of people out there that can connect on that same story, whether it's a car or a tractor or a boat or whatever, you know what I mean? Like,
like that, you know, that got me like teary eyed because the connection you have with family members from a long time ago and something you thought was lost been found, right? It's awesome. But then on top of that, like I've seen some crazy user generated content for Porsche, right? Like I remember Andrew and his Porsche friend will have a photography date and they'll go out and like, let's take pictures of each other's car.
Pretty much. Yeah.
You know, people take it really serious. So like, you know, I'm sure all that helps with the brand and with the community loyalty and the brand equity going forward. Right. And so I wonder, like, after today's conversation, what is like the biggest takeaway you guys have that you want to share, or maybe like ideas for companies that could utilize this kind of framework?
You know, you have to have a media strategy, and you know, you're building a community. It's if you have passionate people that believe in your brand, like building a community is easy, right? And
great.
And leveraging that community can help your brands because they're the passionate users that are actually using the product, right? They are going to have the best feedback. They're going to tell you, you know, like what their problems are, and they can help you improve the product, the brand, whatever it is, you know? So I think Porsche has just done a really good job of cultivating their community and just the way that they're able to reach very separate audiences but connect with them through, these stories like we just mentioned. They're just
Mhm.
experts at storytelling.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I think they just are able to really connect with their audience base in so many different ways. So I think that
Yeah.
that's kind of my takeaway is what are the stories that you're trying to tell and what are the stories that people care about?
Yeah.
And how do you put that out there and how do you create it in a way to connect with your audience or your passionate users?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because like I was just thinking, all the things I remember about the brand, about Porsche, are the stories, the things I
Mhm.
watch, things that Andrew tells me, like Blackpink, favorite band, they have some sponsorship. Those are the things I remember, not necessarily like the specs that you guys mentioned in the beginning, right? And I want to say that's like, majority of the population out there. You have the out there who are not like the part of the community that might become a customer one day, right? Those like the specs, you get your nerd car enthusiast hooked, but then all
Yep.
these stories and the brand media strategy kind of gets people connect with a brand and then potentially become customers. What about you, Andrew? What was your biggest takeaway after you educated?
Yeah, actually, like talking through this, I kind of came to a realization just now. It all starts with product. Like,
Mm,
who cares about this? Like, the whole reason this community exists is because the product is so damn good, right? And the stories come from the product, the branding comes from the product. And I say this now because I'm in like very product development mode, right? And I'm just, how do I make this thing innovative? How do I make this thing valuable? How do I make this thing so it changes like somebody's life for the better, right? Whether it makes them laugh or makes them have a good feeling or makes them more efficient or help them with something that they're bad at, right? And so I think a lot of times, and as we were talking through this, I think sometimes we use communities to make up for a bad product. And that maybe we use
doesn't work.
communities, right? Maybe we use communities to say, oh my gosh, like we have a shortcoming here. We need to add more value to our, and I say this actually to people like, hey, communities can add value to your product. But I think the caveat I have to add to that is that your product already has to like really make someone's life better. And sometimes, again, when we're looking for silver bullets when it comes to marketing or engagement or retention or content or those things, like we're always trying to find ways to get people to buy our thing or use our thing or do our thing. You try to use community to try to get them to do that more. This idea of community led growth. If that product isn't that great, it's actually going to be a really uphill battle. And I'm facing this right now with a community that I have. And I think with a product that may not just be there, right? And like, is the community trying to make up for the lack of product? And what you see with Porsche is that over the, almost 100 years now, the
Cheers. Yeah.
75 years, whatever, that they've been doing this community has truly grown like very organically. They didn't have to build circle. They didn't have to do any of this stuff. It just happened because there's a common bond around the product. So like, I think, and I think of what I realized out of this is that maybe if you're struggling with your community and your community is like a piece of your product or supposed to be, and it's not just getting the traction that you want. Maybe it's not necessarily the people or the people in the community and what you're offering them. Maybe it has nothing to do with your product, right? And maybe your product, might need to be looked at and actually the delivery of it, and that you might be trying to manage things with trying to use a community. So that's just maybe a contrarian view that I don't know, it might ring true for some people, but I kind of have some inklings of that of some of the communities that I'm working with right now. And in talking through this today with you guys, it kind of made me realize like we always went back to like the reason why people want to be associated with it because everyone likes the way the car looks, they like the way it drives, they, all those
And the
things, right?
perception of the brand
And the
too.
perception of it and being
Hmm.
associated with it. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's I don't know if that's a good answer, but it's maybe another perspective to weigh at to look at like is
Yeah.
community right for you and your brand.
I think that's a great answer because what I got out of it was like, as much as all the brands and companies and startups looking at what's happening, you kind of also need to look at what's not happening, right? If your product and service has been out there for a while, but there's like no one talking about it on Reddit or like, and that not like either good or bad talking. Like if nothing's happening, then that's probably something that you need to pay more attention to instead of, keep on focusing on throwing dollars at marketing or throwing dollars on building cooler website or whatnot. Like the company should also pay attention to what's not happening.
And it's always about your audience. If you know what your audience is, you're building the product for the audience, I think the community will very naturally follow. So
yeah, like Andrew always say, when there's so much friction in doing something, something's probably not 100% aligned, right? So this is the antidote for everything what you usually talk about in this podcast about, what we should do. But there's also things like sometimes you just need to take a pause and really look at what's not working and if this is even the right thing for you to go on.
Because I'll be honest, I don't think it was hard for Porsche to build this community. It was easy. It was so easy. And it just happened. Rennsport, all these things just happened. And because they already had a awareness and a fan community that organically grew, like it always sells out every 7 years, right? You cannot buy a 911 GT3 RS because, there's too much demand for it, right? Like it was easy for them because they kind of, and now we don't know how hard it was to start the brand up through the 80s and 90s, right? And they almost died multiple times. Don't forget that, right? But yeah, like I think there's a lot to be learned, but I think getting to a point where Porsche should be easy, but building the product and the brand and the media and all that behind that is very hard. So maybe the thing I actually learned from this is if you do those things right, your community will be very easy to build.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. I learned a lot, and I might print out that pink Taycan and put on my poster board as a motivation to do good in life or something.
I hope some girl did. I mean, that would be amazing if there's some girl who like has the poster of that and Jenny like on her wall. I mean, that would be the ultimate win. I mean, like no doubt,
Yeah. And if any of you listeners out there has that, please send a picture to us. Okay, listeners, if you enjoyed our discussion today and learned something new from us, please share with anyone who might find this episode helpful. And please hit that follow, subscribe button to get notified. You can also check out the blog page on Toby Agency's website where we share insights in community building, email marketing, and other digital marketing tips. And lastly, don't forget to follow us on social at Run with Toby. See you guys next month.
Bye, everyone.